Today, in our reading of the publication The Century, we will be reading a few paragraphs of a very interesting human being. A human being whose single action affected the lives of millions, and indirectly, his single action has affected the lives of billions of humans for more than 100 years. And what is interesting is his effect on human history. By comparison, very little is known about him. In fact, probably most humans could not even recognize him by his name. But it is this person that we will be reading about today in our publication, The Century. Perhaps by the end of the reading, you will recognize who he is and what action he did that has affected significantly global human history. Paragraph 1. Gavrilo Princip was a 19-year-old student at the beginning of 1914, immersed in the study of ethics, literature, and politics. Born to a Kmet family in a rural part of Austrian-controlled Bosnia, Princip had grown up in extreme poverty. His father struggled to till wheat over 4 acres in the Bosnian hills. And while the crop was barely enough to feed his own family, he was nonetheless required to give the cash equivalent of 1/3 of it to his landlord each year. 6 of the family's 9 children died in infancy, a fate they expected for the sickly Gavrilo. And though Gavrilo survived, he was a scrawny and distant child who was described as suffering from feelings of inferiority. As a teenager, Princip buried himself in books and dreamed of becoming a professor. But the urgencies of political rebellion proved too distracting. Like many other young Serbs, he had grown frustrated with the conditions endured by his people under the control of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and dreamed of liberating them to join the Serbian kingdom next door. He was a popular opinion in the southern Slavic regions of Europe in those days. Most Serbs believed that the purest members of their race lived in Bosnia and Herzegovina. With nationalism rising and the empire of Franz Joseph teetering, they felt that the moment to free their weeping brethren in chains had finally arrived. Princip chose Sunday, June 28, 1914, to stake his claim on history. While Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie prepared to visit Sarajevo on that day, Princip and 6 other members of the Black Hand, a Serbian nationalist terror group, plotted his assassination. Their scheme was anything but professional. The group consisted of a printer, a carpenter, a teacher, and 4 students. 5 of them were under 20. The eldest was 27. None had ever handled a weapon before they conceived their deadly plan, and they knew little about their target except that he was in line to succeed Franz Joseph. Weeks before the planned visit, the terrorists secured 6 makeshift grenades, 4 aged Browning pistols, and 7 vials of cyanide to induce their suicides after the plot had been carried out, and set off for Sarajevo. On the morning of June 28th, As Franz Ferdinand and Sophie climbed into the back of a black convertible sedan, ready to tour the Bosnian capital, the 7 plotters took their positions along the parade route. The first 2 assassins to encounter the Archduke lost their nerve. A third lobbed a grenade toward the car and missed, striking the vehicle behind Ferdinand's. But fate had decided to give the Serbian murderers another chance. An hour later, when Ferdinand resumed the parade, his driver took a wrong turn, landing their car outside where Princip himself stood, barely 5 feet away. The Serb hesitated, then, turning his head, fired 2 shots. Well, the event that happened next, perhaps you're familiar with. There's a nice paragraph earlier in this chapter that sums up the events that happened because of Princip's action. The paragraph reads this way. The latter half of the century's second decade was dominated by a war so brutal and so unnecessary it would give new meaning to the word absurd. Nearly 10 million people died and 20 million more were wounded on battlefields across 3 continents. Of course, the theme of this portion of the book is the Great War, as some historians refer to the war that took place between the years of 1914 and 1919, most commonly referred to as World War I. And it was this man, Gavrilo Princip, who assassinated Archduke Francis Ferdinand, creating the series of events that would lead to a war of catastrophic proportions. Anyways, that's where we will stop our reading for today, and we will cover more from our publication, The Century, in a future video.